We are in Douglas County in the west central Minnesota, halfway between the Twin Cities and Fargo. I'm Chad Olberding, owner and operator of Rustic Roots Farm, LLC in Alexandria, Minnesota. We raise specialty crops. Our specialty crops include maple syrup, asparagus, garlic, and we started growing log-grown mushrooms as well. This is our agro-forestry operation. We have 50 acres total at this site, 29 acres that are wooded. We produce pure maple syrup. We currently have over 160 sugar maple and red maple trees tapped. We even have a few black maple trees. I haven't actually gone out and counted all of the maple trees, but I'm guessing we could increase by at least 3 times that. And as we continue working on our brush management and cleaning up and making more paths, we should be able to access the maple trees that are further behind the sugar shack more easily. We have been tapping trees here for just under 20 years. We've been selling maple syrup since 2015. Maple syrup accounts for approximately 30% of our overall farm sales. When we started collecting maple syrup, not only because of where we lived and that we're in the middle of a forest full of sugar maple trees, but in Minnesota, the winters get to be too long. And it was a way for us to get outside and start getting some exercise instead of having to sit in the darkness of winter in the house. Our kids grew up learning how to maple syrup. My husband and I started tapping our trees before we had children, so they've been coming out since they were really little. This year, when we were tapping, we had 2 drills running. So my husband was running one and my son was running the other one. So we had 2 crews for tapping. So we tapped in half the amount of time, which was great. And so the kids have been helping since the very beginning. Determining when to tap a tree is a little bit of an art, a little bit of a science, and a little bit of luck. We look at the forecasts. We want our temperatures to be above freezing during the day, below freezing at night. That way we catch the sap as it's going up the tree during the day and we catch it coming down the tree at night. We also look at things like the buds on the tree. The buds are produced going into this season, the fall of the previous year, but we don't want the buds to swell or to flower because once they do, then we know we're at the end of the maple syrup season. The syrup takes an off flavor and you spend a lot of time boiling it for something that you can't consume. Sap production per tree varies on the day. Some days we don't get very much. Other days we can fill a 5-gallon bucket in a day. So on those days we're out there collecting every single day. This year, with it being so warm, caught us by surprise. We had to hurry up and get started before we were ready to get started. We were not even able to finish our sugar shack, but we got a roof over it before we had to fire up the evaporator for the first time. Typically this time of year we were able to get caught up on some of our other farm chores, but instead we were out in the sugar bush tapping trees and collecting sap. The first thing we do is we identify the trees by the bark and by the structure of the limbs. If we have any questions, I have an app on my phone that I use just to make sure that it is the maple species. When we tap trees, we have a specialty bit that we put in a drill. That bit is a certain diameter and a certain length so that we tap only as far into the tree, into the sapwood as we need to. From there, we take spiles and we pound them into the tree using a small hammer. And then we collect using a bucket system. So off each spile, we put a hose and the hose goes down into a 5-gallon bucket to collect. We like the exercise of going out through the woods to collect each bucket. So we bring collection buckets out with us. We dump the buckets on the trees into those buckets and then we haul them back out of the woods. This year has been really easy for collecting because we don't have any snow. But some years we have to pound down paths with our snowshoes and our snowmobiles before we even go out to start collecting because the snow is so deep. We have an RTV with a storage tank in the back, or a transport tank that holds up to 65 gallons. So this year we upgraded. Instead of pouring each bucket into that transport tank, I now have a pump that I can pump it up into the tank. So I'm doing less lifting up over my head, which is really nice. The kids appreciate that too. Once we fill that tank, or we're just done collecting for the day, we bring it back to the sugar shack, and there we pump the sap from the transport tank into stainless steel bulk tanks. Once we're ready to boil, the bulk tanks we pump up into a feeder tank. The feeder tank then has an autofill into the evaporator. That's run on a float system, so it will be constantly filling the tank. We don't have to fill the evaporator itself. We were able to upgrade to a more efficient evaporator this year, and it will reduce approximately 70 gallons of sap into 1 gallon of syrup per hour. Our old evaporator took approximately an hour to do 45 gallons of sap to turn that into a gallon of syrup. And what we're finding is it took about the same amount of wood to do the 45 gallons as it's taking us to do the 70 gallons. So being able to upgrade to this new evaporator, we're able to operate much more energy efficiently. And then on this new evaporator, we upgraded it ourselves. We put a little extra money in to have an automatic draw off. So instead of having to check it every 15-20 minutes on the specific gravity and the density of the syrup to see if it was done, now it's temperature controlled and it draws off automatically. In this building, this is our sugar shack. This is where the raw syrup is brought in and put in our storage tanks. From the storage tanks, we pump up into the feeder tank. This is our feeder tank. It holds 120 gallons of sap. The sap then flows down the hose into this float box. This float box, its job is to maintain the level of sap in the evaporator pan. This valve controls into the sight glass. The sight glass is here to help me know what my level is in this tank. It's a little bit taller than me, so I can't look in there, especially when it's evaporating and steaming. So I use the sight glass to make sure the level in this tank is where I want it to be. This evaporator pan is chambered, and so there's many more points of contact with metal as the sap passes through, which helps the sap evaporate at a faster rate. Also then, if it evaporates faster, we aren't using as much wood to run the firebox. As the maple syrup goes through the various chambers, it reduces, it evaporates off the water, so you have the maple syrup. It continues into, this is the finishing pan.
And then we have an auto draw off here that allows the syrup that we test to a certain consistency when it's done. And this valve will open up to the temperatures that we have it set at. Typically it's like 219 degrees, and it just automatically comes out. And once it drops in temperature, this valve will automatically close again, and then it'll continue to boil off until that temperature reaches 219 degrees again.
We evaporate once we get enough sap collected to make it worth our while to fire up the unit. This whole system holds about 40 gallons, so we need to have enough sap at a time in order to fire it up. The last run we approximate 300 gallons through it. We ran this over this past weekend. The first run took us longer than it should because we first tested everything with water. We brought buckets of water out, filled it up to make sure that all our seals, all our connections were tight where they should be. It probably took us 2, maybe 3 hours to get it all set up. We fired it for 5, maybe 6 hours, and then it took about 3 hours to do a cool down, shutdown process. We had a 6-hour boil of about 280, 300 gallons, and we ended up with 7 gallons of syrup. As we get more familiar with it, more comfortable using it, we will be able to load the wood a little more frequently to keep the fire a little hotter, to run it a little hotter, a little faster. So with our initial run, we ran more than a gallon of syrup through in an hour. So we evaporated enough sap to make a gallon per hour. The wood goes in the firebox here. It only took a half a cord of wood to run 6 hours on this over this past weekend, which is much less than what we've done previously. A half a cord ended up producing 7 gallons of syrup. A half a cord would be from about here to here, up to here, and back 4 feet or so.
The wood that we use is from any down trees. We typically try to pick a hardwood tree, just get a little more heat out of it. It takes less volume of wood to get the same amount of heat.
So how has the energy efficiency savings impacted your operations from upgrading from your original designs to the new one?
The efficiencies on this evaporator compared to our old one is we have a blower fan, and they've done some technical upgrades inside with the how the air flows through there. They create a turbulence in there more, so you get a better efficiency of using the wood through the system. So you boil off a little more efficient to save on your wood and energy that way. It's got flues inside that raise up, so you can shorten your pan length and width, but you also gain, with all these flues, it's more surface area to boil faster. So in this system with the raised flues, we run like 1.5 inches, 2 inches of sap through the unit, where our old system, we would have been like 6 inches. So just in that depth, you're not boiling as much. It doesn't take as much heat to get it to warm up, to start boiling, so you gain the efficiencies there. This one has the evaporation rate of 75 gallons per hour roughly. Our old pan had about 25 to 30. So we can run this syrup a couple different ways through here to boil off to finish. So as it comes through here, we can run it through the first one, go out the backside with a connection, come back through, and then finish currently right here. Or we can flip the direction and run it the opposite direction and come off through this one. The reason to do that is get sugar sand, it's more commonly known, will build up in these back two pans as you finish boiling. So by reversing the flow, it'll pull some of that sugar sand off and not cake to the bottom of these pans that we have to clean at the end of the season or throughout the season, depending on how much sugar sand we get in there. And then also with drying off, we're getting a lot closer to syrup compared to our old system where we had to actually take it inside and finish it inside. So as it comes off here, we could actually filter this sap and actually bottle it right away if we chose to make that decision.
With a little more experience running it, we'll have the confidence to be able to take it from here, filter it directly, and then bottle it. Where right now, we're still a little chicken, and so we just shut it down a little prematurely and then finish it where we can watch it a little closer. But with a few more runs, we might get to where we're taking out that extra step too.
And how much money does that save in time in the process?
So the big thing is it's about half the time to boil off, just because of the rates. It could almost be about a third. And then wood is about half. So you're saving, time cutting wood, time splitting wood, all that. So there's a time savings, and then the wood, like I said, about half for the same amount of boiling off. So you're gaining the efficiencies in time and in wood. We'll see at least probably double, if not a little bit more, efficiencies.
Costs can be managed depending on how you start. We started small. We started with a few taps and some buckets. We liked what we were doing. We added more taps, and so then we needed to buy a bigger cooker. We were able to buy our first evaporator used from somebody else who was upgrading to bigger equipment. We paid that off with our sales in like 3 years. When it came time to increase production and become more efficient, we were able to secure a grant through NRCS to pay for part of the evaporator. And we're anticipating that the balance left, we will pay that for that in the next 3 to 4 years. Maple syrup production takes a lot of time in a short window. There are some seasons, like last year, where they would run for about a week, they'd shut off for a week so we could get caught up. This year, it's running kind of fast and solid, so the time commitment is a lot. We come home after our regular jobs and we collect the maple syrup. We try to get it done before dark. We've been out here a few times with headlamps. And then if we're firing it up, it takes many hours to run through the evaporator. And then what we found is it takes many hours to shut down the evaporator to get it ready for the next go around. When we wrap up for the year, we have to do some heavy cleaning of the processing equipment. We clean the maple syrup evaporators, the tanks, the buckets, the filter press, all of it needs to be cleaned. But once it's clean, we can put it away and then just have to do quick clean before we start. The trees themselves, we don't have to do anything other than pull the spiles out of the trees. The trees will heal themselves and there's nothing that you have to do. Some people think you have to try to patch that hole. It's best to just leave it alone and let nature take care of itself. So the next year, what we do when we're tapping the trees is we look for the old holes and we shift over one direction or we shift up a little higher because we want to be out of that sapwood that was used the previous year, and you will have better production if you don't tap in the same spot every single year.
Chad and Julie received some literature from farmers.gov that sparked the interest in exploring maple syrup production through the agency's different programs that we have available. Maple syrup production is actually a very common practice here in the state.
We found out Kevin had actually really gone above and beyond what we were expecting and had made contacts to other states to see how the EQIP application would work for an evaporator, what kind of other NRCS support was available. So for that, we appreciate, because we found somebody who was willing to work with a small producer like we are, who grows more non-traditional crops.
The program that helped fund the evaporator here was the Environmental Quality Incentives Program through the Agricultural Efficiency Practice. And that is a program designed to help our producers implement different conservation practices within their production. And in this case, it fit into their forestry practices of their sugar bush management and evaporating down their maple sap to make maple syrup. And through the EQIP program, each practice that we have requires some level of technical assistance to provide to our producers to guide them to their production goals.
We would have not go to a better evaporating system, savings of wood and stuff. We would have had to put the whole cost on our shoulders.
So if you're looking at upgrading your energy efficiency within your operation for maple syrup production, first step is just coming to an NRCS office and speaking to a representative there, and then filling out an EQIP application. Chad and Julie coming to us and getting the EQIP funding to upgrade their maple syrup evaporator has been a great success, because they not only are saving on energy efficiency and time, but they're also opening the door for other producers around the state of Minnesota to come into the office and explore the different practices that we have available to them.
Working with Kevin was a pleasure. We've worked with Kevin on a couple other projects coming up as well. Kevin has helped us take the non-traditional route to find different funding and operations that fit our needs as niche market producers. I would recommend anybody that's starting out new to this small scale as we are process to stop into the office, ask some questions, get involved in a lot of different organizations, and there's a lot of good information out there. If you can find the correct people to help you out along the way, it's a very good experience. And we've continued to explore other options through the NRCS program as well. Besides the evaporator, we have 2 high tunnels projects that have been ordered and are on their way. And we're also doing a forestry project as well with the EQIP program this year with the help of Kevin.
We are working with NRCS to make sure that our sugar bush remains healthy. We've got a brush management program where we are opening up the canopy so that maple trees get more sunlight, which helps the trees produce more, but it helps reduce some of the competition for the trees so they get more nutrients and we have a healthier sugar bush. We've found the ones closer to paths where there's more sunlight, they produce more sap in the buckets than the ones that are further in. So we're hoping that when we start to thin out the forest a little bit to open up the canopy, that our trees that are further in will produce just as good as the ones along the paths.
And is there any noticeable differences between this year collection and prior years?
This year has been more up and down with the lack of snowfall. We're getting the up and down temperatures. We're not getting the runs like we typically would get on a day. So we have days that are 60 gallons and then we have days that are like 10 gallons. So pretty unusual on what we're getting for a run every day. It's kind of up and down so much.
I think if you like to get outside and you want to be in the woods and you have access to maple trees, I think maple syrup is a great opportunity for either hobbyists or for somebody to go into professionally. We sell direct to consumer. We have a website where once the maple syrup is available, we list the maple syrup. Typically we produce around 45 gallons of finished pure maple syrup. Right now, people pick it up from us either at our farm store or I meet with them in town. We produce things trying to use natural and sustainable methods. By being able to tap the trees on our property and make our own maple syrup, we know exactly what's in our food. We know exactly what our customers are getting. They trust that what they're getting is a pure product that has been sustainably raised.